Welcome back, everybody, to What a Concept, a new show here on my channel where we do a deep dive into a concept record. And we have a kind of a Neil Morse double meal here. We started off with Testimony and we're coming right into Snow. I feel like these two albums are really, really good to balance one another off. And my guest today is the wonderful Nathan from Nathan on Shuffle. Hello, Nathan.
Hello, good to see you.
So glad to have you on the channel. One of my favorite reviewers and talkers of prog music out there right now. So any chance I could collab with you is a good excuse for me.
Definitely feel the same way.
Ah, thanks, man. Um, so why Snow? Why'd you pick Snow? Because the guest is the one that chooses the record. So it was kind of serendipitous that the first two were chosen independently of one another. So what made you choose Snow?
Yeah, well, as anyone who's probably watched my channel or knows me knows that I'm like the Neil Morse fanboy. He's my favorite artist, the one that I first connected with on a deep level when I was really getting into prog music. It ties into my story of discovering it, where my dad introduced me to like the classics, and I already loved a lot of the classic concept records that he showed me, like, Genesis is the Lamb and, Tales from Yes and things of that nature, and Power and the Glory by Gentle Giant. I loved all those records, loved concept records in general. But I wanted to discover newer versions of this kind of music,
Mhm.
music that was more current and that kind of tied into the current music that I was listening to. So I went off and discovered some of the more modern prog through Transatlantic, and really came to love Spock Spirit as like my pretty much my
Mhm.
number one band that I loved when I was getting into this music. That felt like my band, not just me taking over my dad's taste in music.
Yeah.
This was my first like big discovery, and I went out and bought The Light as my first album because I thought, why not start with their debut? But this is one of the first albums that I heard after that because it was like the most recent one that had just come out. And I actually asked for it for my birth or for Christmas, I think, from my grandparents, and they ended up buying it and getting it for me, which I was shocked
Mhm.
by because I'm like, this is kind of an obscure CD. How did they even find it? But I was really excited and just fell in love with it like immediately. It was one of
Mhm.
those seminal albums that really like spoke to me right away, and I just listened to it nonstop, and it really solidified my love as of this band and like as my favorite band of all time.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I have a very similar story in that, like, throughout middle school and high school, it was the deep dive into prog, right? The Genesis, ELP, Yes, King Crimson, Gentle Giant. And then when I went into university and I was hungry for more, and I'm like, I want more contemporary stuff. So that's when I first discovered like Dream Theater. That's when I discovered the Flower Kings, and IQ, and I was like, okay, I keep hearing about this Spock's beard. Mike Portnoy has talked at length about how great Spock's beard was. I'm going to give these guys a try. So I did a little bit of search and I found that V had their 26-minute epic on it. It starts off with a
Yeah.
20 or a 16-minute epic. So I'm like, that's the one I'm going to go for. And I listened to it and this is going to be a little controversial. I was disappointed. I was
Oh.
like, what is this is like accessible radio prog. I don't want accessible radio prog. I want weird. I want quirky. I want, mind-bending time signatures and like,
Sure.
insanity. So for the longest time, I kind of put them to the side, and it wasn't until I went away for university that I discovered like Transatlantic, and I'm like, okay, so this Neil Morse guy's kind of cool. I can mess with this. I could do this. And then when I moved to Toronto, there was this massive, massive record store that had like an endless array of used CDs, and I found Flower King's Paradox Hotel as well as Snow. And I'm like, well,
Nice.
both of these are like $10. So, I'm still on the fence about this whole like Spock's beard band. I don't know, man. So I picked it up and I immediately fell in love. I'm like, okay, okay, now I'll give this Spock's beard another try. And like that was the year that they dropped X. So I immediately picked that up, fell in love with that, followed up with Brief Nocturnes, fell in love with that. I went back, got their self-titled, and like those three albums are still some of my favorites. Anyway, we're
Sure.
getting off course. We're getting off course a little bit. We're going a little too deep. With that all being said, it took a while for me to really get into Spock's Beard, and this was the album that connected. And then afterwards, I dusted off the old V album and put that back on. And there are moments from that album that I really, really love. Still, I still have a little, I'm just like, oh, that radio accessibility, like Neil trying to be the pop star that he always wants to be. Oh, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah,
um, so I kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper into like this album itself. Before we tackle the concept, before we talk about the music, this album is quite significant in the prog sphere as well as within the career of Neil Morse. I'll give you the first crack. What do you think is the big significance of this album, not only within Spock's Beard, but also within Neil Morse's kind of career? And how did it help move the prog sphere forward when it came out? Because I mean, if you look at like prog in general, like this was 2002, right? Like
yeah.
there wasn't a whole lot of albums kind of like this on the landscape.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I discovered this album like pretty soon after it came out, and pretty soon after I like fell in love with it, I had heard that Neil Morse was leaving Spock's Beard. So,
Hmm.
uh, this is a pretty monumental from his career because it was the last album he did with Spock's Beard, and subsequently left to kind of pursue his own solo career, based on his own like religion and how he felt like what God was telling him to do at the time, and all of
Hmm.
that stuff. So for the band, this was a major milestone album that it kind of took Neil away, the primary songwriter and the main frontman of the group. And so they had to really pivot and go in a different direction. But for the prog as a whole, I think it was a big album because Spock's Beard was kind of gaining popularity at this point. I think they were becoming one of the bigger modern prog names at this time, and this was like a
Hmm.
big statement by them. And I think it kind of sparked a lot of bands to come to want to do concept albums and to be excited. And like you mentioned, the Mike Portnoy factor that he was really speaking up this album in particular, if I remember correctly. So that really brought some notoriety to the scene as well. So I think it was a pretty big album that is kind of a landmark in the more modern prog space.
Yeah, did you ever in the last episode that I did, we talked at length about the testimony book. Did you ever get a chance to read the Neil Morse testimony book?
Yes, I have
I,
read it.
I would have been
Yes. It's
shocked
been a
if you
little while,
didn't.
but yeah.
I would have been like, Nathan, you got some homework, my guy.
Yeah,
Because, there's a section in that book that I particularly love, which was the struggle that Neil was having at the time of whether or not he wanted to follow through with leaving the band. This was what God was telling him. He was like, your time with Spock's Beard is kind of at it. It's run its course. But your real work is within your solo career. I don't know if you can feel it as much in the music here because it kind of feels like he's like at the peak of his game within this
yeah,
album within Spock's Beard. And I think at least within like the culture of prog at that time, we're off of the heels of arguably my favorite transatlantic album, which is Bridge Across Forever that came out the previous year. And I think he took a lot of that like really deep prog aspect and like kind of injected it into this album.
for sure. I agree. And I
Absolutely.
like Neil, like you kind of mentioned, one of the off-putting factors was like his radio accessibility kind of stuff. But I think for me, that was kind of something that drew me towards him, like the way
Mhm.
that he's able to balance like these great melodies, this like kind of almost pop hooks and singable moments that you remember, but blending it with like this really adventurous, fun, exciting prog music at the same time, like is what really drew me in, I think, to his style.
Yeah, like this, and I keep pointing to Spock's Beard as being like the more accessible prog. Like I tried when I was in my university career, and I'm like, I'm going to spread the good word of prog to everybody that I can. I'm going to knock on doors with like, I don't know, octopus from Gentle Giant in my hand, saying like, "Have you heard the good word?" Um,
Right.
and obviously, maybe octopus isn't the most accessible one to go for. Um, but with an album like Snow, I think I could have a case. I think I could get people to get in on it because of those catchy hooks, those very accessible harmonies. And that was one of the things that I think Spock's Beard really like soared with was that, Beatles-esque like late 60s, early 70s pop rock stuff, that we would see from like the
Mhm.
Beatles and the Beach Boys and kind of those big pop acts. And I know Neil's a huge Beatles fanboy. Like if we're Neil fanboys, then he's the fanboys of the Beatles.
Right.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
like, Wind at My Back is just like, I think anyone could enjoy that song. It's just very relatable and just like a big catchy song that anyone could grab a hold of and sing along to. It's like that's part of his magic, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into the concept. Let's talk about the concept. What I'm gonna throw the ball over to you first. This is a narrative concept rather than a
Yeah.
thematic concept, but we can play with some of the themes as well that they're tackling. In your understanding, what is the story of Snow?
Yeah, so my understanding is it's about a character named nicknamed Snow, who basically has this kind of gift or ability to see into people's souls, I guess, to kind of see their true nature and to help heal them. So he leaves his like kind of country upbringing and comes into the city and meets all of these characters who are kind of in rough situations, people who are addicted to things or who are, dealing with other trials and homelessness and things like that. And he's able to bring these people together and really help them through his abilities and, has this great following that he builds up. But it also kind of builds up his own ego in the second half of the disc. And then he falls in love, but it's not reciprocated. And he
Mhm,
kind of falls into a downward spiral when he's at his lowest moment, it's kind of the people that he helped that kind of rally together and help him to come back and be able to realize, that life's worth living and that he should continue forward. And, it's partially, I think, kind of a religious awakening, perhaps at the end, that he's able to,
mhm.
you know, realize who he truly is and he can continue forward and be lifted up by those that helped him. So that's at least the way I interpret it and understand it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward story. We're not dealing with like IQ Subterranea, where you're like, "What on earth are you talking about, my guy?"
Right.
Um, it's not like The Lamb where you have to like really dig to figure out what's going on. It's a fairly kind story, both for the listener as well as in the messaging itself. And like, what a power to have of like this. I always equate it to like a perfect empathy, being able to touch
Yeah.
somebody and just know exactly what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and you put it very succinctly of like seeing into their soul. And like the amount of connection you can have with somebody with that is like it's paramount. It's like incredibly moving, and showcasing how Snow uses that both to help but then also to create this following and the pitfalls of that and what it means to have too much of an inflated ego with a power such as this. It's such a very interesting journey that this character of Snow goes on, and I love how one of the themes is like, where do you find fulfillment? Do you find it through your actions? Do you find it through how other people perceive you? And I think the record leads you to the end point, which is you find fulfillment through your own like spirituality. At least that's my interpretation. Like the wind at my back is really like the relationship that Snow has with God once he finds God, once he finds that
Right.
spirituality aspect. And it's very similar to the journey that Neil Morse was going on at the time, because like upon writing, that's when he went, to be the born again Christian that he is, going to church a lot more. And it's like, oh, all these things are now starting to happen to me now that I've basically given my will over to God. Um, and it's quite moving in that way. So it's like, oh, I can find fulfillment just through myself,
Sure.
with the spiritual help of whatever deity you decide to lay your will towards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's very largely like you can map on to it Neil's story, his own life, how he kind of went through a similar dark period that like Snow goes through in the story, and that he was kind of lifted up by his community and his budding spirituality, and that led to his own
Mhm.
fulfillment in his life, and sort of what leads to him leaving Spock's beard subsequently
Mhm.
as well, which is kind
Yeah.
of interesting with the I Will Go song that's kind of like his statement that he's gonna go as well
Mhm.
from Spock's beard, I suppose.
Yeah. And there was always, and I mentioned this in the first episode, I always felt like this was Neil mirroring the career of like Peter Gabriel, where he's like, I've put
Yeah.
down my big double disc concept album. Okay, bye. Right. It's like I'm gonna
Yeah,
leave now because that's what Peter Gabriel did after the Lamb.
yeah. There are certain
It's
parallels to that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Where I was just like, oh, that's very interesting. Did you have any other like themes that kind of came out of this record? I know for me, as I mentioned, there was the where do you find fulfillment? there was also obviously within the power of connecting with people and the power of connecting with people. Um, and that's essentially what saves him at the end is like creating all these very lasting relationships and kind of reminding yourself that those are the important ones, not the ones that you don't have, like the irrequit oh, I can never pronounce that word. Irrequit the love that was not returned. It's like I always feel like Porky Pig or Elmer Fudd, where it's like I can't come up with the words, so I'm going to talk around it. Um, yeah, and any other themes that you could pull out for this album?
That's the main thing, and, you know, having empathy for fellow people and how that can help lift you up, and also kind of the pitfalls of, like, inflated egos and,
Mhm,
like, letting power get to your head and how that could spiral you downwards, if you let it. So, yeah,
mhm.
but, yeah, mostly, like, fulfillment and letting, like, those that you help you when you need it in time of your time of need, you know, being open to that help and being able to allow it to let you move forward.
It's such a moving album in that case, just the story and the themes that we have on there. Um, So yeah, let's talk about the music then. Let's move on to part three, the music. And I always like to kind of tackle this in two ways. First is just music on its own. How does the music, make us feel? Is the music any good? But then on a little bit of a deeper note, how does the music reinforce the story and the concept? Um, because I always love like this is one of the things that I love about concept records is that the concept almost gives structure to the music and how does that then communicate more of the themes and more of the items within the story and the concept itself. So let's talk about the music. Do you like the music on this record?
Yes, I do like
It's
it
like
quite a bit.
no, it's bad. I only like the story.
No, I love the music here. I think it's some of the strongest Spock stuff, and like I said, it's a good balance between like that pure classic prog sound, but also some of Neil's more poppier tendency and some of the hooks and the choruses and things to kind of allow it to have that stickiness that you know you remember these songs and they're very
Mhm,
memorable. So I love that balance, and I think the music really portrays the story very well throughout the whole album as well. When he's in his darkest moments, the music's really intense and kind of crazy in its own way, and when it's more, you know, he's having that empathy and that love, you know, you feel that in the music as well. So I think Neil's a pretty good expert at doing that, at being able to fit the story, you know, to the music, to, you know, making the music kind of work well and portray the story that he's trying to tell.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that this was like the roadmap that Neil Morse would then continue to use with most of his concept records. I don't think all of them, but definitely like the big double discers. I'm thinking of like the
Sure.
testimonies,
Yeah.
the similitude of a dream, like some of those like big powerhouses. It's like you can see the DNA, you can see the roadmap from this just within a musical standpoint. As much as I love some more of those radio friendly tracks, I'll say, like, the Carrie track, the kind of big ballady one, Wind at My Back, which is another big one. I love those kind of like interlude instrumental pieces. This is where Spock's Beard, I think, really reached their pinnacle of musicianship, of composition. I will sing Rio's praise because his friggin' he has like this full track dedicated specifically to him at the end of the second disc that's just him going off and I'm just like more of this please. you know
Yeah. Yeah,
um
it's awesome.
it is, and because the themes are so much of that empathy of connecting with people, you do hear that, and I think his more accessible style of music really plays to this. I don't think you could have this same kind of a concept record with a band like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Gentle Giant because those albums, almost by design, are very isolating. They're very like, let's not connect with everybody. We're going to connect with a certain few, right? like
Sure.
you
Yeah.
know but I could see bands like Yes or John Anderson creating an album like this. Like it has very similar feels to like Sun Hollow within his like bringing everybody together and this big collective. And yeah, I love that connectiveness within the music itself, not being isolating, but being very welcoming to kind of people off the street, you know? It's like
Yeah,
as I keep saying, I could knock on a door and present this album with somebody and they'd be like, "Okay, okay, okay, I can listen to this." Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the gateway. You know, I have a friend that I talk to a lot about music and different things, and I was trying to get him into prog, like as we were as I was getting into the music, I, you know, of course wanted to share it with someone. And this was like kind of the gateway to get him into this prog music was Snow, because
Mhm.
he could relate to the story and he understood how the music fit in with the story, and it was fairly accessible. He liked the melodies to it, so it was pretty easy to leap from there into some of the other more proggier, more out there
Mhm.
kind of stuff that I would show him later. But this was a good like entry point into the genre.
Absolutely. And I know this goes kind of beyond the actual album itself, but I think the perfect expression of this album is the one that he did at Morse Fest way back in the day, where he reconnected with the boys, you know, what, 10 years after he left, 10 to 15 years after he left. And
Yeah,
every major singer from the band takes a moment on the album to sing. You know, you have Jimmy Keegan, you have Nick DiVergilo, you have, oh, I can never remember the other guy's name. This is so bad. You got to help me out. I'm floundering.
Ted
Thank
Leonard.
you, Ted
Yeah.
Leonard. Yeah, it's like I can see him. I see the soul patch. What's his name? Um, you know, and they all have their moment of, you know, telling the story and furthering their story, and you know, either taking a character or just taking a moment. My favorite part still is when Jimmy Keegan takes the moment and he like leaps off the stage, and I'm like,
Yeah.
my man's gonna get himself hurt. You know,
Yeah.
we're gonna love that guy. uh
Amazing.
yeah, but again, it's this, you know, community. It's the relationships that we've built with others, and you know, the fact that even though Neil Morse left, there was never bad blood. You know, there was always like, we're good for you coming back at any time. We're happy to guest feature on any of your records. You know, that's kind of integral to the overall themes and concepts of Snow itself. It's that connection with everybody.
Yeah. And I did want to, I'm glad it came up because that Morsefest show I was at, it's the only Morsefest I've been to, so I was able to attend.
Wow.
And yeah, when I heard that they were like reuniting and playing Snow, it was like, I have to make every a chance to be there because it's such an important album to me. And this is like a very like singular moment that I don't know if will ever be repeated. So I
Absolutely.
made arrangements and made sure I could be there. So it was amazing to be in the room.
Oh
And
man.
it's kind of the theme of Morsefest too, is the community
Mhm.
building aspect, and that it's like people who come together fairly regularly every year and have this kind of like fellowshipping environment. And so it kind of plays into the theme of the album too. Just everyone's, you know, having that feeling of empathy and of this group all coming together, the band itself as well. And it just makes that music even more special, that that's kind of the soundtrack to this kind of community feeling.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like the more I talk about this, the more I have, you know, my fans and friends just reaching out and being like, "Hey, I was at that show." So it's like
Yeah.
you and my buddy Tallman on Twitter. You know, he was just like, "Oh yeah, look for me in the crowd," and I'm like, "Man, who wasn't there?" You know, at this point, like
Yeah.
who wasn't actually there? All right, so this comes to a point that might be a little bit. We're going to have to trudge through the weeds to try to find something to talk about on this part. This is are there any negatives about this record? Anything we didn't like about it? Anything that doesn't work? Is the concept too heavy-handed? Does it get lost in the sauce? Is there any kind of negatives about this album?
Yeah, that's a difficult one for me because of how much I love it. I think the first disc is pretty much perfect as is. I could argue that the second disc maybe drags on longer than it should, or that there's certain songs that maybe don't fit as well, like something like Looking for Answers. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same
Yeah,
thing. I'm like looking for answers I could kind of do without, but what would I fill that hole with? You know, because the one thing I do
yeah,
appreciate is unlike some double disc concept records where, you know, the one is definitely outweighed by the other, you know, time wise, they're very similar. And I kind of
yeah.
appreciate that. So I would want to like fill that up with something.
Sure. And
But
I do love the whole like everything from like Freak Boy onwards is just like
mhm.
perfect to me. I love all that stuff. So it's very minor, just this like the first part of disc two, maybe isn't as solid as some of the rest of it, but
Mhm.
once it gets going, I think it's just like races to the conclusion in a really satisfying way. So that would be my only caveat, I think. Aside from that, I really adore everything else on the
Mhm.
record. So it's hard to think of anything else.
Yeah, I always feel like this is gonna be the point of the episode where it's just like, "Oh, well, what can I even talk about anything about this?" The one thing I wanted to, talk about in this section was the dual use of "Wind at My Back," how both discs essentially end with the same song, and when I first listened to this record, I thought it was just I don't wanna say that they ran out of ideas and they're like, "Well, let's just do that, but better." And I'm still like, I've definitely grown to it, and I appreciate why they did it to kind of mirror Snow's journey and to show this was what he was getting and this was how he was getting fulfillment when it was just seeking approval from others versus seeking approval from himself and his spiritual journey, and how the two
Mhm.
are mirrored, but also how one is much more impactful. How do you like, because I can't think of any other album that really does this to this extent. Like there have been reprises, there have been motifs that have been echoed throughout an album, but I've never really seen the same song essentially done twice on a record.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that as a fair point that it could feel a bit repetitive in that way. But I do like the callback aspect. Like that's one of my favorite things about concept records is how they can draw back from things that happened earlier and kind of reframe it in a new way with a new meaning. I think even beyond Win at My Back, I think there are a lot of parallels between the two discs and how Snow's journey musically when he goes into his dark spiral is maybe similar to some of the dark spirals that the other characters he interacted with went through in the first record in the first disc.
Mhm.
So I think there's parallels there. But yeah, it is interesting that it's like fully like the same song twice, like not just a small reprise, but basically repeating the song. But I think it kind of has a slightly different feel to it. Maybe the second time, more like joyful, more like exuberant, more powerful. And so I think it works for me that it comes back around because of that. So
Mhm.
that's basically my takeaway is it's just, bringing back those same feelings, but in an even grander scale because of all that he's been through.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because as I've mentioned, I really grew to adore it and grew to love the two tracks. This is one thing that is kind of similar with any like concept record, is that I don't think I could listen to any of the tracks in isolation. Like if I were to listen to Wind at My Back, I'd listen to the one on the second disc. I don't think I would just listen to the one on the first disc. Um, and
Yeah.
there are, small tracks here and there that I'd be like, okay, I can listen to that by itself. But like, the one thing that I always wonder is like, could you listen to this record on shuffle? you know,
Yeah, that could be a wild
that could be
experience.
a little bit of a wild ride in that case.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah, I'm gonna put in a little bit of another category here that I just thought of as we're talking, and I think I might continue this moving forward. But would this concept record make for a good film? Like, would you think that you could translate this in the same way that Tommy's Who, or sorry, the Who's Tommy? I always do that. Or Pink Floyd's The Wall, or even like American Idiot had its own Broadway stage show. Um, like, could you see this being a full-fledged movie at any point?
Um, I actually could. I think this could work well as a movie. I know there was some inspiration from the movie, is it Powder, I think, that has
Oh
a similar
yeah, I can see
story
that.
perhaps.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. I've never seen it, but I've heard that there's some similarities there. But definitely I think I could imagine this as like a stage show or a movie or something like that
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
it follows a very clear narrative concept, and I think they could really portray all these sections really well in film.
Yeah. Yeah, that brought me back to like middle school. I remember when Powder was like really big and people were talking about it all the time. And I just remember those two. This is completely off topic, but like
No
there's
problem.
there's this and like K-Pax of like, these two traveler. You don't know if they're aliens. You don't know if they're spiritually or divinely sent. But one was a lot more played for like laughs, and the other one was 100% serious. So I think was Powder the one that was based off the book The Traveler or something like that. Like there was a book that
Not
anyway.
familiar. I'm not sure.
No worries. It's just I just very clearly remember that. And I just remember the trailer of that movie. I never even drew that comparison, but yeah, both are albino, both have mystical
Yeah.
powers, you know.
Yeah, I don't think it follows quite the same narrative, but just the
No.
idea of a albino man who has a gift or ability, I guess, is pretty much the
Hmm.
main
Hmm.
connection.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, this brings us to our final segment, and this is the Platinum Concept Album test. This is where I've got 5 questions, and I'm going to pose it to you, and we can discuss these to see whether or not this record is a platinum record. If it gets none of these, like if it fails all these questions, then it's a trash album.
Okay.
If it gets 1 out of the 5, then it's a tin. If it gets 2 out of 5, it's a bronze. 3 out of 5 is silver. 4 out of 5 is a gold. And a 5 out of 5, it passes all 5 without any disruptions. Then it's a platinum record. So let's dive in. Let's see if this one passes. I always love putting records through these questions. And the first one's pretty easy. Is the concept original? Would you consider this concept a original concept?
I would like we said, there's maybe some inspirations and some like common themes that you experience in other concept records or other stories, but I think the story at large is pretty much an original concept in this record.
Yeah, I would agree. The kind of the original source, I always find can be argued because it is a little bit of a self-insert autobiographical reflection that we
Sure.
see with like The Wall and Tommy. But I
Yeah.
think that this one kind of moves far beyond that because you can see the parallels, but I think the root of the story has that very clear narrative theme. Um, so I would agree that this one is an original concept. So that moves it away from trash. It is not a trash record.
Okay.
We can safely say that.
I would be sad
Uh,
if that was our conclusion.
well, we got to put it to science. We got to put it to the numbers. All right. So number 2, the second question is, does the music reinforce the theme of the concept? And we talked a little bit about this before, but let's drill down.
Yeah.
Does it actually reinforce the themes of the concept?
I do believe so. Yes, I think Neil's really good at this, at like using the music to reinforce the concept that he's trying to convey, and having those big, like almost gospel kind of moments where the story is at its most meaningful, and you really feel the impact in the music that really mirrors the story and what's going on. And some of the darker, more chaotic moments kind of match the concept at that time when Snow's going through his dark moments where he's kind of spiraling. You hear the music just kind of get crazy and chaotic as well. So to me, it really works well. The music fitting in with the story and really making it work together in tandem to tell this really excellent story.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, this was one of the conversations that we've been circling around throughout this entire episode, really, is
Yeah,
just how much of a master Neil is at conveying an emotion, conveying a theme through music. Um, and I mean, I think he really started that and really flexed his like writing muscle on this record so that he could go on and do One and Question Mark, where like that was the whole point of those records, is like,
yeah,
how can I distill my experiences and my thoughts and my emotions strictly through music? So yeah, I
yeah.
I can give this one a very easy pass for sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. Yeah, it's his music from this point forward is all kind of about like portraying his spiritual conversion through his
mhm.
music and being able to showcase that in the most powerful way that he can do through it. So I think this is a perfect example of that and like one of his first early examples of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, that's 2. So we've moved up. It's no longer a trash or a tin. We're into a bronze at this point.
Cool.
Let's see if we can keep the momentum going. And this was another thing that, the third one is one that we've already talked about is it accessible to the casual listener? Can somebody that has never listened to this band or this style of music pick it up, sit down and listen to it and get fulfillment out of it, get enjoyment out of it?
Yes, and I clearly think so. I told a story about my friend getting into this kind of music through this album, so I felt like it was kind of the perfect gateway to get him into it because of the accessibility of it. And I think it's why it connected with me at first, because when I first discovered this album, I was like kind of just taking my first baby steps into progressive rock, really. And I liked it just because of those melodies, because of the accessibility, even before I became like a massive fan of all of the proggy, quirky bits that surround
Mhm.
it. So I definitely think this is one of the prime examples of an album that could be a good introduction and is accessible to a casual listener.
I would agree. Like, especially when you think about some of the other prog records that were coming out at that time. Like, for a casual listener, Opeth might not necessarily be, their cup of tea. Dream Theater with Scenes from a Memory, you might be able to get a little bit more buy-in for, but like the concept records and the big magnum opuses that you were getting from like the Flower Kings and um IQ and Marillion at that time, like they were a little bit more isolating. It was harder to kind of connect with a casual listener, but within this one there's enough of that like Beatles pop DNA found within it that I think anybody could listen to without having to run over to the stereo to turn it off. And there's enough of the noodly proggy bits to kind of introduce them to the idea of what progressive rock is all about. Um, that's found within some of the more instrumental passages, so it kind of gives them a taste. There's enough of the um flavors of prog in here to make them interested. So I think
Yes.
that's I think that's a pass. I think that's three for three so far. So we're moving it into
Nice.
silver. This is where it gets a little tricky though. These last two questions I put on here to only allow the cream of the crop, only the best
Okay.
of the best.
We might have to
Uh
argue. We'll see.
this
Just
is
kidding.
where it's going to get dicey. Well, and especially within the double discers,
Uh,
because double discers can be a lot, and so that's why for number four, is the music solid from start to finish? Are there any dips in qualities? Are there any duds?
right. And I guess I did mention, maybe I I ruined my argument already, but
Yeah, I was putting breadcrumbs in here to be like, but Nathan, I remember you were saying about that one track from the second disc.
but it's very minor, but yeah, looking for answers has never connected with me as much as like pretty
Mhm,
much the rest of the record. Feels a little bit different in style almost than a lot of what comes around it.
mhm,
So if there was a weak point, it would be that, but that's like a small 3 minutes out of, like 2 hours or whatever it is. So, and I like you said, the structure that both discs are about equal in length, and how they kind of mirror each other. And so I kind of like how long it is, and like I don't know if I'd want to just pull out songs and take them away. So, maybe
mhm.
they could have replaced it with something a bit more thematically relevant, but it's so minor. It's
I
hard to
know.
like knock it too hard for just one little song that I'm less into. But I
No, I
still
totally.
enjoy. I still watch it. I still, watching it on the
Mhm.
live Morse Fest. I was having a lot of fun watching them perform that. So,
Yeah, it wasn't
it's
like you're
not
like,
a
oh man, this song. Well, I'm going to tune out for 3 minutes. All right, time
yeah,
to
I'd
check
never skip
Instagram.
it.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, and this is part of the reason why I put this question on here. Not to say that this album is trash just because of that one track. That's why there's these tiers, right? Like a gold album is still a gold album. Um, but there are a few tracks on here that aren't as good as the rest of the music that's around it. Um, and this is something that we'll get to the last question because I think this album fails this question, but it succeeds the next question, which will make sense when we get to that one. But because you are the guest, I will leave you with the final decision of whether or not you think that the music is solid from start to finish.
Okay. Um, Yeah, I'll be fair to, I don't want to fudge the numbers here, so I guess we'll take a miss on just
Okay.
one of them. I guess
And
that's fair,
and that's fine. Like I said, not all the
but it's
tracks
very
have to
close.
hit. It is very
You
close,
know,
and that is the risk you run when you do a double disc, right? Like I
yeah,
can't think of too many double disc records that is perfect from start to finish. Um, it's kind of
yeah.
like, do they bite off more than they can chew?
Like even
Um,
something as iconic as like The Lamb, you could probably pick, a
oh,
couple
there are
tracks
there are a
that
few tracks from
are a
the
little
Lamb that
weaker.
even I'm still like, I don't know about that, man. Um, and the Lamb is one of my all-time favorite records.
Yeah.
Even my favorite record of all time, Selling England by the Pound, has More Fool Me, which I'm just like, eh, it's fine. But like when I first listened to it, I would always skip it and go straight into Epping Forest. Um,
Right.
anyways, fifth question, the final
Okay.
question. And this one I think it would pass. So I'm already kind of showing my hand in this one. But
Cool.
that is the album the perfect length? Is it too long or too short?
Yeah, and I agree. I do think it's the perfect length. I actually really like the length of it, and like keep mentioning, how the two sides are kind of equal and kind of mirror each other, and like that first disc to me is like one of the most perfect discs in my discography. I really
Hmm.
love it, and I love that the second disc kind of matches it in a way. And
Hmm.
so, and because it's so accessible and fun to listen to, it never feels overlong to me. It feels like a fun ride that I can get through the whole way through without like, oh, it's still going. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I just really love the whole experience, and it makes it feel like it's, a really important concept that they take their time with it and that they let it develop. And it really helps the story along, I think, to really dive deep and be able to go through each step without,
Mhm.
cutting it short.
Yeah, I am 100% in agreement. Like again, I'm thinking to some of the other like 90s and early 2000s prog double discers. Like this wouldn't be like a Stardust We Are from Flower Kings where I'm just like, guys, come on, like there's some tracks on here you could cut, right? Even though I know people love that record and I'm not here to I'm just here to compare. I'm just here to compare. I feel as though Snow really is the perfect length for what it is. You're telling this big story, and you need that time to show the growth of this character. You need that time to establish, like, this is where he came from, this is what he's doing, so that when the fall happens and he's able to kick back up, you understand a lot more of that. I think if this were like a single disc, I don't think it would have the same impact, especially with a lot of the call and answer tracks that we have on here
Yeah.
that you have on the first hand and then you have it again a little bit later on, like you have Freak Boy, I think, on both of them. You have oh, what's the obviously Wind at My Back, but
Yeah. Devil's Got
they're
My Throat is
Devil, that's the one I was thinking of.
reprised. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you have all these call and answers that wouldn't really work if you only had them on one disc, because it's they put down the idea, but the idea isn't really realized until that second disc. So, yeah, I think honestly, I think this is the perfect length. So I'm good for giving
Awesome.
this an easy pass.
Nice.
So in that case, when we tally up the numbers, we have a gold-plated record on our hands here. I
Okay.
always figure like a four is like a 95%, which is like really friggin' good, rather than a 4 out of 5. Because that's
Right.
how fractions work. um,
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can tell that I definitely passed math and derivatives way back in the day. Um, so finally, would you consider this album a masterpiece? That's how I always like to end each of these episodes on. Would you consider this album a masterpiece?
For me personally, it's one of my all-time favorite records. I definitely put it in my top 5 records of all time. So for my history and the things that I've experienced with it and how it helped develop my musical tastes and how it was one of these important moments, even at that Morse Fest, being able to experience it live, and that even brought it to another level, which I didn't know was possible.
Hmm.
Uh, I do consider it like a masterpiece for me personally. I mean, it didn't get the 5 out of 5, so you could argue how could it be a masterpiece if it didn't quite get that final point, but uh, just my experience with it kind of pushes it over the edge, I feel like,
Hmm.
and gives at least for my collection, I would consider this one of the important jewels of my prog collection, and so masterpiece for me at least.
Yeah, I would agree. Like if this isn't a masterpiece, it's as close as we have ever gotten to an album being a masterpiece because like this is the kind of masterpiece that I really particularly treasure because upon first listen, I was a little bit lackluster in my enthusiasm for it, right? Like I was just like, it's fine. It's fine. But then the more I listened to it, the more I grew to appreciate it and the more that I like really loved it. And the same thing happened with The Lamb. The same thing happened with Tales of Topographic Oceans. So,
Yeah,
you know, I think Neil would take that as like a massive compliment to say like I would very easily put this on the shelf with The Lamb and with Tales and be like, yes, these are some of the standouts in Prague double disc concept records.
definitely.
I
Yeah,
if I'm considering The Lamb and I'm considering Tales of Topographic Oceans as a masterpiece, I would have to include this with that as well. So
totally. I agree.
amazing. That
Awesome.
brings us to the end. Thank you so much for letting me gush about snow for about 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, no problem. It's exciting for me as well. One of
Yeah,
my favorite albums. Any chance to talk about Neil Morrison anyway is my favorite thing. So,
amazing. Yeah, well, we'll definitely have you back on so we can talk about one of Neil Morse's many other concept records.
yes,
You know,
I'd always be happy to.
because I didn't jump when I was first getting into Neil Morse, there's so many of his records that I was never able to listen to because they're not on streaming. I think most of
Right,
them are on YouTube, but that's not really how I listen to music anyway.
right.
Um, so yeah, I actually had to like fork over the whatever $12 a month it is for Waterfall just so I can listen to most of these records. But I mean, I've never listened to like Question Mark or you know, some of his like deeper cuts before. So I'm like, I can finally get into some of these boys. So
Yeah, they're all amazing. Just he has this string of concept records starting here, going forward through like Testimony One, Question Mark, Soul Scriptura. He just like hit them out of the park one after another, and I love them all.
yeah.
But and I talk about any of them happily.
Well, maybe the next one will be like Solar Scriptor or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So thank you as well. Anything you want to promote? Anything you want to let the watcher know?
Basically just, come visit my YouTube channel if you're so inclined. It's definitely full of great prog content like this and, weekly prog news and shows I do with my wife where I'm introducing her to prog and all kinds of reviews and stuff. That's Nathan on Shuffle on YouTube. So be happy to have anyone on board.
Amazing. Yeah, I've left a link down below to go and check out. All of the videos are always 10 out of 10. It's my like comfort watch that I have like kind of later at night when I'm having my final bowl of cereal before going to bed. I'm like, oh, let's see what Nathan video is kind of queuing up next.
Nice.
So definitely go check it out. It's a good time, it's a good vibe. So yeah, yeah. So thank you, Nathan, for coming on, and thank you all for watching. I haven't figured out a send off for this one yet. This is the second episode, and I haven't figured out how to finish it off. You know, because I want to distance it a little bit from my usual videos. So I don't know. I thought maybe it's like that was a concept, but I don't know if that really sticks. So
Maybe.
I guess until next time, I'll just say bye.
Bye.